Hey, it's me again. So I'm gonna give you a few tips on sanding a spear gun. And the way I sand, it kind of depends on what the overall or the final finish on a gun will be. On a gun that I just use oil on, or an oil finish, I sand down to a 220 grit paper using a random orbital sander. And I started off with like a 120 grit paper. I don't know if you can see that 120 on there. So I start with 120, get a rough, well, not a rough, but a general shape that I want. Cut down all the sharp edges and round everything over, and then I finish off with 220. And I use a random orbital sander, such as this here, made by DeWalt. And it usually takes about, let's say about anywhere about between 10 to 15 minutes to do a spear gun. Now, the reason I go to a fine grit of 220 is that when you oil a gun, you can feel the grain of the spear gun, of the wood, and it just feels a lot better when you sand to a finer grain. Actually, you could go even finer than this to like a 320 grit. But 220 is sufficient, and it's, for all practical purposes, it's fine. Now, with a gun that you're going to do an epoxy finish, you don't necessarily have to go to a really fine grit. You can go, you can start off actually with 80 grit and to get a general shape, or just stick with a 120 grit paper and get the shape you want out of the spear gun, and just go straight to epoxy. And the reason is twofold. Epoxy will grab better to the wood when it's a little rougher and not as smooth. And the second reason is that epoxy will fill in all the little scratches. Now, there's an exception to this rule. When you use stains in an epoxy, and if you don't go to a really fine grit, the scratches in the wood will show up when you use a stain. So be careful there. You'll see it as soon as you make this mistake. is that you'll sand down to the shape you want with like an 80 grit paper, and then you go straight to epoxy and you add some stain or pigment into the epoxy, and as soon as you put that epoxy on, you're going to start seeing all the scratch marks from all the little swirls in the wood from the random orbital action of the sander here. So keep that in mind. Like I said, this hobby, it takes practice to get good, but you have to start somewhere. And I'm just sharing with you my past experiences, and hopefully you can take that and plunge ahead with your next spear gun. So with that, I'm going to start sanding a spear gun that is ready to be sanded. pretty good. It's nice and smooth to the touch. As you can see, I blew it out with air just to get all the little dust particles out of the grain. So this is pretty much done as far as sanding goes, and it's ready for the finishing step. Make sure you enjoy yourself out there. I'm going to have myself a beer.